I'm not quite sure what's going on, but something's wrong with you. And then immediately, do you have a trauma bond with one of your parents? What about family members? Traumatic bonding is a topic that I've spoken about on this channel and in my career over the past 14 years a lot. And one of the reasons why is because traumatic bonding, for me at least, is one of the most difficult things to come out of. I personally believe and professionally believe that traumatic bonding is worse than codependency. And one of the reasons why is because traumatic bonding really keeps you stuck to a person who is traumatizing you. And it's often a person that you fully trust. Codependency, on the other hand, and I explain this to my clients all the time, is this over dependence on the other person in such a way that you become so merged that it's difficult for you to determine, is that his feelings or is this my feelings? Is that her feelings or, is this my own feelings? You fuse together so much that it's hard to tease apart yourself from the other person. So that's kind of codependence. But in a nutshell, traumatic bonding for me is a little bit different. It's a little bit more difficult too, because you're really dealing with a heart that almost goes into denial to survive, So let me give you a brief example. Let's say, for example, you have a father that you have become traumatically bonded to. Instead of being able to go to your mother and say, Dad is sexually and emotionally and psychologically abusing me, you keep that held inside as an internalized secret because you don't want to disrupt your mom and dad's marriage, and you certainly don't want to tell on your father. You may even go into such deep denial that you deny that you've ever been sexually abused. That is traumatic bonding, for example. It's, I am so desperate for this relationship to be a relationship, and I truly need my dad. I truly need my parent. And so therefore, I'm willing to minimize what I know is clearly wrong so that I can have that person that I so desperately and emotionally need. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about this a little bit more. I'm getting back to the roots of my specialization, which is trauma and PTSD. So let's go ahead and jump in. Let me briefly introduce myself in case you are new. My name is Tamara. I'm internationally and board certified as a trauma therapist. I'm licensed in mental health. I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma and traumatic bonding. Let's jump in. So anytime I discuss traumatic bonding with my clients, one of the things that I do is tease apart what's going on with traumatic bonding versus what's going on with codependency. But then once I explain the differences between the two, then I explain what it actually is. And in a nutshell, traumatic bonding is a poor and unhealthy emotional attachment to someone. It is also an attachment to someone who is causing or creating a cycle of abuse, right? The cycle of abuse is things are good, then things get a little bit tense, then we all kind of have a tension stage, and then things blow up, and then we have a honeymoon period where everything is wonderful and beautiful, but then that cycle just continues. Here's a picture of the cycle of abuse right here. And so in traumatic bonding, this happens more than we think it does. I remember my first client, and she was a beautiful young lady that I had maybe 2 years after I had graduated from graduate school, and I was doing an internship at a psychiatric hospital. And she was traumatically bonded to her father. When she came into the hospital, I was immediately assigned to her as her clinician. And I remember going up to her and saying, hi, how are you? And she did not give me eye contact. She stayed like this for a long time. And she had like a cowboy hat on. She had cowboy clothes on, a skirt, cowboy boots, and it was at least 80 degrees outside. And so I realized, okay, this is a comfort thing. She needs comfort. So the cowboy hat covers her face, and it also makes her feel comfortable, And the cowboy boots, I later found out, was kind of like this facade that she's tough and she's fashionable, and she has an identity. And none of that was the case when she came back into the room. And I remember her sitting on the couch in front of me, and I began asking her questions. And, she stayed like this for the longest time, and she didn't give me eye contact for the first 5 to 6 sessions. When her mother came into the session, then that's when I began to see things I didn't want to see. I started seeing without really knowing that she was being abused emotionally, physically, and sexually by her mom. The sad part about this scenario, and this happens a lot in situations of traumatic bonding, is that it's really hard for the adult child to step in and say, help me. You have the right perception of my life right now. You're a therapist, you're my extended family, you're my husband or my wife, you're my best friend, you're my boss, you're my coworker. Please step in and help me, right? And so sometimes with people who are experiencing traumatic bonding, it's hard for them to just take that one step to get help. They internalize, they stay dejected or despondent, right? They suffer from dysphoria, which is a form of depression. They look on their face depressed. There's a lot of different signs that an individual is stuck in traumatic bonding, but it's really difficult to figure that out on your own. You truly need to have a personal experience with traumatic bonding to truly get how it entraps you. So let me give you a couple of pointers that may relate to you. And as I go through these, you may begin to see that you yourself have been in a traumatic bond with one of your parents or maybe a family member. So let me start with the first thing. The first thing that you are likely to see with somebody who has developed an unhealthy emotional attachment or traumatic bond with a person, and we're talking about within your family or the parent-child system, is justification. Now, I've seen this a lot. Research has seen this a lot. I'm going to post in the description box below a few articles where justification was a tool used by somebody who was in a traumatic bond with their parent to kind of minimize their own abuse and to kind of, cause themselves to be comfortable and okay with the abuse that had happened to them. Justification is pretty interesting because here's what happens. The individual who may be you, for example, has been abused by a family member, a parent, and maybe somebody else outside of the family. And it's so shocking to your system, it's so shocking to you that instead of looking at the fact that this person is harming me, I have to get out and I have to get help, you begin to kind of process in your mind why something's happening and why you're coming to a place of it being okay. Usually sexual abuse victims who may have been sexually violated by their fathers, sometimes instead of running to get help, they kind of stay in the situation. And they stay in the situation because, number one, they either didn't want help or they never got the help that they needed because nobody saw that they needed help, right? So they kind of develop what's called learned helplessness, which is this learned set of behaviors and patterns of behavior that kind of keeps you stuck. You kind of learn how to be stuck where you're at and you can't move ahead, And so sometimes sexual abuse victims develop that learned helplessness in such a way that they don't know how to step out of that triangle of that trauma bond or that traumatic bonding that they're experiencing. So sometimes they just give in to that sexually abusing father and they learn to be okay with it as long as mom and dad are still together, as long as me and dad are still getting along. And it's only that frame of mind that kind of helps them cope, if you will, cope in their mind and in their heart with the fact that dad's sexually molesting me, right? So a trauma bond typically starts with fear, but then it can also start with justification. He's probably doing this for a reason. I need to keep dad happy, right? Or I need to be quiet because if I don't, mom's going to get upset and our whole family will be destroyed, right? So you kind of go through this justification process in your mind. And I know a lot of you may have not experienced sexual abuse of a parent, but this is just an example to show you how justification can start as a seed and then it can grow. Next thing is defensiveness. People who are stuck in traumatic bonds, tend to be very, very defensive. They begin to defend that thing that they know is wrong. Right? So let's use this example of sexual abuse. Instead of stepping up and saying, I'm trapped, dad is molesting me, you become defensive if somebody points it out. Or if someone says, I have some concerns and some suspicions. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but something's wrong with you. And then immediately they may say, nothing's wrong with me. I don't know what you're talking about. And so they're going to become, this person is going to become defensive. And that's because they have to protect their own mind and their own heart while they are in the trauma bond or the traumatic bond. Let me give you an example that may be a little bit more relevant to you. Let's say, for example, you have a very emotionally dysregulated mother, for example, or a sibling or an extended family member, and you know that you love them, you care about them, and yet at the same time you've had to put up boundaries because they're unhealthy for you, right? So you put up those boundaries and then you begin to feel bad about it, and then you begin to feel like, okay, we're family, maybe I should work this out, maybe I should give this a chance again, maybe I should, maybe I should, and maybe I should, right? And so in your mind you're going over this. Well, let's say, for example, instead of just backing up a little bit and saying, you know what? They betrayed me, they deceived me, they lied to me, I'm not gonna go back to that family member right now until they gain some boundaries. Instead of doing that, right, you open the door, you open the floodgates, and you're like, come on back into my life because you're my family. Well, let's say they do something else to you and you go to another family member to complain, and that family member says, why are you acting this way? You know she loves you. I don't think she's doing anything wrong to you. The first thing you're going to do probably is become defensive, right? You're going to become defensive because you either have to protect the decision that you've made to go along with this family member that has harmed you, or you're going to be defensive if somebody else says, see, I told you so. She's not a good family member to be around. You have to keep your distance from her. You're going to get defensive. And that's how you know that there's something going on here. Maybe not a codependency, maybe a trauma bond. The next thing that you need to think about as well is go within yourself and kind of say, and kind of ask yourself, I should say, am I depressed here? Am I stuck because I'm dysphoric, because I'm down, I'm despondent, I'm dejected, right? Am I in this trauma bond or this trap with this person that I love and care about, despite what they've done to me, because I feel depressed? I feel too unmotivated and too stuck to get out of this. So am I just going along to get along? And that's the deep-seated therapeutic question that you have to ask yourself. The next thing is secretive. Sometimes being secretive means that you are in a trauma bond. You're trying to protect the people that you care about or the person that you care about. And so that leads you to, again, put up those defenses, and then no one can help you. So you become secretive, right? No, Dad didn't come into my room last night. I don't know what you're talking about. You must have been dreaming, right? Or Dad hasn't sexually molested me. He would never do such a thing. But deep down inside, you hold on to the reality that he has. And so that trauma bond just gets even tighter, right? I've also seen too, and I hate to say this, in my office, I've seen children who have been sexually abused by their fathers, and they put up so many defenses, and sometimes they put up such high walls that it's hard for me to help the individual, the adult child, because they want to defend and they want to keep that ugly reality a secret even to themselves, right? And so they become an enemy, not only to the parent who has violated them by talking to me about it, but they've also become an enemy to themselves because they're secretive, And so that's a trap that you can get into. Secrecy. The other thing too is confusion. You want to keep that in mind. Confusion over what's true love and affection. You're not really clear on what's a good boundary, what's not. And you may also have porous boundaries, meaning it's too flexible, fluid boundaries, right? It's too flexible. You don't really know how to put up a wall when you need to. You don't really know how to set that line or draw that line in the sand. You're just really kind of too flexible and all over the place with your boundaries. And that is because trauma bonding causes this confusion over what true love and affection is. And so you approach things based on all you know. Right? And that can keep you trapped. The next thing is very, very, very poor relationships in your own life. You might find it really difficult as an adult to set those healthy boundaries, to be in a relationship with someone who truly loves you, to seek out affection and love in a way that's healthy. You may really struggle with that because in that trauma bond, you were so stuck, so dysphoric, so confused, right? So conflicted about how to think about the person that has you stuck, that you never learned a healthy way to be in relationships. And so relationships become stormy for this kind of a person. I think too, fear and displacement are two things that are most likely to happen to you if you're in a trauma bond with a parent, a family member, or in other relationships. We can even broaden it to include other relationships. Fear is a fear of losing that relationship by opening up about what has been happening to you, whether that's sexual, physical, psychological, emotional, financial, whatever the abuse is. Fear kind of keeps you stuck there, right? It keeps you stuck on the other side of healing. You're not ready to run and jump to the other side of healing, which is over here, because you're afraid over here that things are going to get a little shaky. And so you kind of stay in the position of fear. Now, displacement is, I have these internalized emotions and I don't know what to do with them, so I'm going to displace them and put them into road rage. I'm going to displace them and get a whole bunch of tattoos because they hurt. I'm going to do something else that is going to cause a disruption of my life because I've displaced all of my emotions and I've been on the wrong side of everything. Right? So you want to keep that in mind as well. The other thing too is attraction of all the wrong people. Then, you begin to take that into your adulthood, and that becomes a seed that also grows, right? You're in that trauma bond, and then you create this life in that trauma bond, and then when it's time to move on to another adult and to have a healthy relationship, you don't know how, because that trauma bond has planted a seed that causes you to jump into similar relationships, and then you begin to feel trapped. I have also seen too an openness or a welcoming of trauma dumping. Now, this is something I don't talk about on my channel enough, and so I might be bringing more videos on this particular term. But here's what I've noticed. Trauma dumping is basically a term that describes, being in a relationship with somebody else or talking to somebody else about your trauma. So you're taking all your trauma and you're dumping it into the lap of somebody else, and there may be a motive behind that, right? Which may be like a coping mechanism or something like that, or maybe you're trying to get that person to understand your pain, or maybe you need that love and affection in return, and so you're telling them about your pain. Whatever the situation is, trauma dumping can become almost like a symptom of how you function in the world. When you're stuck in a trauma bond, there aren't too many people to talk to because you don't want other people to know that you're stuck in a trauma bond. And let's say, for example, you are being sexually abused by your father. The last thing that you want to do is run to Aunt Niecy and say, Dad's been molesting me, and you tell all of the secrets of what's been going on for years. So what do? You hold that inside, you internalize it, right? And it doesn't have to be sexual abuse. Again, it could be anything. You hold it on the inside, you internalize it, and then as soon as you get an understanding person who cares, then you take all that trauma and you put it in their lap, and you're waiting for them to kind of either reciprocate something, feel sorry for you, show love and affection, or you're looking for some kind of response that you've always desired. So trauma dumping is another symptom of traumatic bonding. Not specifically, let me clarify this, not specifically. It's not like we have a certain criteria for traumatic bonding in the field of psychology, but I will say that trauma dumping can be associated with traumatic bonding. Again, because when you're bonded so long and you're kind of imprisoned, you can't wait to find somebody who understands you, and so then you take all that trauma and you put it in their lap because you just need to unload. This topic of traumatic bonding can go on forever. Let me know in the comment section below if you want me to continue to talk about this. I will open up a series on trauma bonding if you want to hear more about this. Thank you so much for being with me in this video today, guys. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button and that bell button so that every time I post a video, a story, an article, a community post, you will get those notifications. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.